শেষ হওয়ার পরে তারপরে তার ওয়ার্ডিংটা তারপরে
এই মানে পুনরের যে কেসটা তাতে কোঅ্যাকিউজ কে কে এখন অবধি জেলে রয়েছে?
18 জন অ্যারেস্ট হয়েছিল। তার মধ্যে নাতাশা, দেবাঙ্গনা, আসিফ, সফুরা, ইশরাত জাহান আর ফয়জান 6 জন বেল পেয়েছে। আর 12 জন আত্মজীবী।
না না, নাতাশা দেবাঙ্গনা কি অন্য কোনো কেসে এখন জেলে রয়েছে না বাইরেই আছে?
না না, বাইরে বাইরে।
আমার একটা জিজ্ঞাসা যে এই যে সুপ্রিম কোর্টে এই 14 বার হিয়ারিংটা হলো না, এটা মানে কোর্ট খুব মানে মানে কি বলবো ক্যালকুলেটিভলি রিজেক্ট করলো বা এড়িয়ে গেল বলে কি আপনার মনে হয়? মানে এমনি যতটুকু আপনার মনে হয় সেটুকুই জানতে চাওয়া আর কি। মানে 14টা হিয়ারিং না হওয়া এটা তো অদ্ভুত ব্যাপার। মানে আমরা প্রত্যেকেই সুপ্রিম কোর্টে প্রত্যাশা করেছিলাম যে কিছু একটা ডেভেলপমেন্ট হবে, কিন্তু 14 বার মামলা হয়নি এবং শেষ পর্যন্ত উইথড্র করতে হয়েছে।
এটা আমার কাছে তো কোনো উত্তর নেই। আমরাও তো 14 বার কোর্টে গেছিলাম, প্রত্যেকবারই ভেবেছে এবার অ্যাটলিস্ট অ্যাটলিস্ট হিয়ারিং তো 14 বারই আমাদের ফেরত হয়েছে যে আরেকটা ডেট একটা পয়েন্টে কোনো মনে হচ্ছিল যে ব্যাপারটা লুপে চলছে, এটার কোনো আউটকাম নেই। যেহেতু ততদিন অ্যাটলিস্ট প্যারিটি স্টেটা উঠে গেছিল যে এবার আপনারা প্যারিটিতে করতে পারেন, এটা জাস্ট কল হ্যাড গিভেন দ্যাট অর্ডার, তাহলে উইথড্রই করে নেওয়া যাক। হাইকোর্টে আবার চার্জ হলে হতে পারে। এবং হাইকোর্টে আমাদের তো দেখুন, মানে আমি যেটা বললাম যে খালিদ সাহেব বা মিরান্ডা সাহেব ওদের যেরকম 2 বছর কেটে গেছে হাইকোর্টে কোনো শুনানি হয়নি, আমাদের লাকিলি হিউম্যান কেসে শুনানি হয়েছে, এবারেও তাড়াতাড়ি শুনানি হয়েছে এবং তাড়াতাড়ি লিস্ট হয়েছে। আমাদের লিস্ট ওইটা টেস্ট করতে হবে, কাজে দেখা যাক হাইকোর্টে কি।
হাইকোর্টের অর্ডার এখনো রিজার্ভড আছে
না, হাইকোর্টে এখন আর্গুমেন্ট শেষ হয়নি, আমাদের এখনো শেষ হয়নি, করবে তারপর রিজয়েন্ডার হবে, তারপর অর্ডার।
আর কেউ কোনো প্রশ্ন করবে এখানে ঘরে বা লিংকে আছে এরকম কেউ? আচ্ছা, লিংকে যারা আছেন তারা তাদের মাইক্রোফোন অন করে নিয়ে প্রশ্ন করতে পারেন, আর ঘরে যারা আছেন তারা তো সরাসরি করতে পারেন, কোনো অসুবিধা নেই। একটু তাড়াতাড়ি করবেন, যদি প্রশ্ন থাকে কখন আবার লিংক কেটে যাবে একটু জানি না। আচ্ছা, এখানে মানে আমাদের এই এখানে যারা এখানে ফিজিক্যালি উপস্থিত আছেন তাদের মধ্যে থেকেই প্রশ্নটা এলো যে উমর বোধহয় ওর বোনের বিয়ের সময় একটা 22 সালে বোধহয় কিছুদিন 5 দিন বা 6 দিন একটা প্যারোল পেয়েছিল। 7 দিন তারপরে তো কোনো প্যারোল। হ্যাঁ, এখন ও কি এরকম আছে না? মানে আপনারা কি সব উইকলি একটা ভিজিটের সুযোগ পান?
হ্যাঁ, আমরা সপ্তাহে 2টো ভিজিট হয়, আর ফিজিক্যাল মুলাকাত নয়। তো এমনিতে আমরা যেটা হয় যে বাড়ির লোকের সাথে খুব বাবা মার বয়স হয়েছে ইত্যাদি, ওনাদের পক্ষে যেতে অনেক দূর ওখানে যাওয়াটা মুশকিল, সেই জন্য ওনারা ফ্যামিলির সাথে ইয়েতেই করে, ভিডিও কল করে। আর আমাদের বন্ধু বান্ধবদের মধ্যে থেকে কেউ একজন প্রত্যেক সপ্তাহে একবার করে ভিজিট করে। 2022-এ 1 সপ্তাহের জন্য একটা ইন্টারিম বেরি হয়েছিল বোনের বিয়ের সময়, তো সেটা বাদ দিয়ে আর কখনো
এর আগে 12 যে হিয়ারিংটা হবে সেটা কি হাইকোর্ট ওটা কিসের হিয়ারিং?
12 তারিখের হিয়ারিংটা কি চার্জ গঠনের প্রক্রিয়া হিয়ারিং না হাইকোর্টের?
হাইকোর্ট
এদিন কি প্রসিকিউশন না আপনারাই বলবেন?
প্রসিকিউশন আমাদের
তারপরে আবার রিজয়েন্ডার একটা হবে, টাইম টেকিং
একটা রিজয়েন্ডার।
আচ্ছা, একটা প্রশ্ন আমি সেটা হচ্ছে যে ওই বলে যে আমাদের বন্ধু বান্ধবদের মধ্যে থেকে কেউ একজন উইকলি ভিজিট করেন, তো তার মানে এখানে যেটা আগে ছিল এই ফ্রেন্ডস এন্ড ওয়েল উইশার্স এইটা ছিল, এখন ওটা উঠে গেছে। মানে ওরা ইনসিস্ট করে ব্লাড রিলেশন, যার মধ্যে স্পাউসও করে না আর কি। তো ওখানে তার মানে এখনো ফ্রেন্ডস এন্ড উইশার্স করতে পারে।
এইটা একটা ইন্টারেস্টিং,
আমি তো পরিষ্কার শুনতে পাচ্ছি না।
আমি বলেছি সেটা হচ্ছে যে ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গলে একটা অদ্ভুত চেঞ্জ এসছে মানে 22 সাল মানে 20 সালের আগে 19 সাল থেকে। সেটা হচ্ছে যে এই যে মানে ফিজিক্যাল দেখা করা বন্দির সাথে, সেটা এখন রেস্ট্রিক্টেড টু ব্লাড রিলেশন অনলি হয়ে গেছে, মানে বন্ধু বান্ধবদের মিট করতে দেয় না। এটা দিল্লিতে এখনো করতে হবে, দিল্লিতে এখনো করা যায়।
দিল্লিতে ওটা ভিডিও কলে দিয়ে ভিডিও কলটাতে ওরা বলে যে ফ্যামিলি থেকে করতে হবে।
ফিজিক্যাল
মুলাকাতে
বন্ধু বান্ধবরা যেতে
10 জনের নাম দিতে হয়, 10 জনের নাম দেওয়ার লিস্ট দিতে হয়, সেই লিস্টটা অ্যাপ্রুভ চলে আসে। সেই লিস্টে যে কেউ থাকতে পারে। তো বেশিরভাগই যারা ফিজিক্যাল মুলাকাতে যায় তারা কেবি ও ব্লাড রিলেটিভ বন্ধু বান্ধবরাই যেত, কিন্তু ভিডিও কলটাতে ফ্যামিলির তরফ থেকে ওটা এক্সিস্ট করে, ফ্যামিলির তরফ থেকে।
ঠিক আছে, থ্যাংক ইউ। আপাতত আপনি যদি ক্যামেরা বন্ধ করে লিঙ্কে থাকতে পারেন, পরে যদি আর একটু কথা হয় তাহলে আপনি পার্টিসিপেট করতে পারেন। এরপরেই বলবেন হচ্ছে আপনি আপনার কথায় বারবার ভীমা কোরেগাঁওর প্রসঙ্গ এনেছেন। ওদের কেসটার আগে শুরু হয়েছিল ভীমা কোরেগাঁও অ্যারেস্ট। ভীমা কোরেগাঁওয়ের বন্দীদের যিনি লয়ার লারা দেশানি, উনি ফিজিক্যালি আজকে কলকাতায় আছেন। মিনিট দেশাই যে টিম, লারা দেশানি উনি আছেন, উনি ফিজিক্যালি বলবেন আর কি। ঠিক আছে, হ্যালো। হ্যাঁ, এরপরে মানে আমাদের প্রথমে দিল্লি থেকে বনঘোষণা করলেন। এর পরবর্তী আমাদের আলোচনা বনঘোষণা করার বিষয়টা ছিল হচ্ছে উমরখালিতে এবং দিল্লি তথাকথিত দিল্লি রায়ের কথাটা না বলে বলা ভালো। সেই ঘটনায় যাতে অ্যারেস্ট হয়েছেন আরো অনেকে, তাদের বিষয়টাতে বললেন। এই মুহূর্তে আমাদের এবং বনঘোষণা তার আলোচনায় বারবারই শুরু থেকেই উনি বলেছেন যে দুটো খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ কেস এই গত 5-7 বছরের মধ্যে আছে, যে এই অনন্ত কারাবাস, যেটা আমরা আজকের আলোচনা সভার বিষয়বস্তু করেছি, যে প্রসেস বিকামস দ্য প্রসিকিউশন। তার দুটো খুব বড় নজির ভারতে। একটা হচ্ছে ভীমা কোরেগাঁও, আর একটা হচ্ছে দিল্লি সিএ বিরোধী আন্দোলনের লোকজনকে যেভাবে অনন্তকাল বিচারাধীন অবস্থায় রেখে দেওয়া হয়েছে। তো বনঘোষণা ভার্চুয়ালি ছিলেন বলে আগে বলে নিয়েছেন, যদিও আমাদের যে শিডিউলটা ছিল সে অনুযায়ী লারা জেসানি প্রথম বলার কথা ছিল। আমরা এবারে লারাকে অনুরোধ করব, আপনি বসেই বলতে পারবেন। Lara Jesani, advocate and civil liberty activist associated with PUCL, People's Union for Civil Liberties, fighting for the rights of the people and particularly inmates of Bhima Koregaon Ilgar Porishad case.
Thank you so much for having me here. I don't know Bengali, so I have not understood anything that happened before this. But I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Lara Jasani. I'm a lawyer from Bombay. I practice in the Bombay High Court, and I'm associated with PUCL, People's Union for Civil Liberties. I'm the National Organizing Secretary and the PUCL Maharashtra Level Secretary. And we have been campaigning for rights of defenders, and especially those who have been incarcerated in false cases for raising their voice against government policies and for dissenting. And this, it's really good that we started with Balchosna. I could not understand anything that she said, but of course in Bombay, we, to mark 4 years of Umar Khalid's, arrest in the Delhi riots conspiracy case, we had also held a program where several of us were there. In fact, Fahad Ahmad and several of us were part of the anti-CAA protests in Bombay. And Umar had come here to Bombay, and he was a part of some of our very big protests that took place. In fact, it is quite, it was quite shocking for all of us when he was arrested in this case, and there are so many people, so many youth who have been inspired by Umar. At the time when he came for this protest, and he would take the platform, we would all be organizing these protests. 6 of us were like, constantly organizing protests from one place to the other, going from one place to the other. And when Umar had come down for a short time and he attended some of the protests, he spoke there. The youth was so, enthralled, so inspired by him. They would all, they would all just come knowing that Umar was going to be there. Such is his charisma, such is, the way in which he spoke, the way in which he invoked the constitution and invoked, the assertion of our beliefs. I think that's what the government felt was a threat to that ideology, and that is why soon later we saw that he was also implicated in this false case. So we had all held a program back in Bombay, and many of us spoke there, speaking about how Umar and several like him, both in the Delhi conspiracy case as well as so many of the other cases that have been filed by the government, especially since 2015 that we have seen, where a lot of activists have been implicated, but also how these laws have been used ever since their inception against defenders, whether they are Adivasi defenders, whether they are minority defenders. We have seen this happen especially with the environmental defenders who have been fighting for their Jadam Zameen in Chhattisgarh, in Odisha, in Jharkhand, even in Maharashtra and Gadchiroli. In so many of these areas, these laws have been used. So I'm here specifically to speak about prolonged incarceration. Then the session started, some of the first things that was said is that, under law at least, jail is supposed to be the exception and bail is supposed to be the rule, but that is not how it is playing out in any of these cases. And one of the reasons also is the ways in which the laws have been drafted to begin with and then changed, of course made a little more draconian. And the second, of course, the role that the courts have played. While it is very, it's very easy to speak at conferences, that are held by law universities on how, our prisoners' rights, on the right to bail. What we see reflecting in court is a more and more conservative and regressive application of the right to bail. And a lot of people are today incarcerated, they are languishing in jail, and especially those who are standing up against the state, because the court doesn't want to stand up against the state. Because the court doesn't want to do that, we are seeing that all those who are actually standing up against the state are being denied reliefs. So this is one of the major things. Another thing that is very concerning is that the number of laws and the number of tools, as I call them, in the hands of the state to silence people are also increasing, and the manner in which they are being used is also increasing. So this is another thing that is very concerning for all of us. First and foremost, to talk about the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. It's whole, the idea of including terrorist activities in the act, which happened over about 10 years back, was obviously to include a lot more, first to increase its application against defenders. That is one of the biggest reasons why, the scope of UAPA itself has been broadened. But apart from that, the amendments that were brought in subsequently, and especially in the last 5 years as we've seen, and also the introduction, even before that, of section 43D5, which is the provision on bail, where, the bail has been, the right to bail has even been narrowed down, because while granting bail, the court can only look at the case of the prosecution and see whether a case has been made out by the prosecution, but not apply its mind to whether it is correct, it is not correct, or listen to the defense at all while granting bail. That has made it extremely difficult for anybody to obtain bail. So if anything is written in the crime report or in the FIR, it is to be believed by the court. And the court is supposed to grant bail. That is exactly what has actually happened. And because of this, 43D5 has made it almost impossible for people who are arrested under UAPA to gain bail. So this application of UAPA itself has been in order to keep people behind bars. PUCL had done a report on how, what is the effectiveness of UAPA. Should UAPA even been there? Because we have a campaign for repeal of UAPA. And our demand is that UAPA needs to be repealed in totality because it is an abusive tool. It is a draconian law which has been brought in to implicate people when there is no evidence against them. So if there is no evidence against anybody and you cannot invoke any crime against them, you just put UAPA. You call them a terrorist, that they are conspiring to do something. All these cases, if you see, they are called conspiracy cases. Bhima Koregaon conspiracy case. Why? Because there is no crime that has taken place. There is no crime that was planned to take place. Okay. There is no evidence that anything is being planned or anything, any crime is, being hatched. So what do? They say you are hatching a conspiracy, and that is why somehow these people are involved. And in Bhima Koregaon case, there is also the question of how evidence has been fabricated. In the sense that there has been planting of evidence on the devices in order to make out a false case. This evidence cannot be authenticated, it is not signed, it is not made by anybody. It has just been apparently recovered by the police through the devices. Right? And the integrity also of this evidence is questionable because there has been no proper procedure of seizing these devices, hash values are not provided on time, that is the imprint of those devices are not provided on time, clone copies are not provided on time. There is also the case, in this particular case, also use of Israeli software Pegasus in order to plant these devices. So at many levels there has been foul play and manipulation and fabrication of evidence in order to implicate people. And why do they need to do that? Because there is no crime, there is nothing, there is no evidence that they have against the people. So if you, the good thing about using UAPA is, you put people under UAPA, because of this provision of 43D5, they cannot get bail anyway. Okay, then you don't start the case. Even in Umar's case, even in Bhima Koregaon case, we've seen all UAPA cases, they don't start the case. So the trial does not begin. You don't need to prove your allegations. You don't need to lay any evidence. If actually the trial takes place, the people will get acquitted. That is why today's session's name is Process When Process Becomes the Punishment. So the entire process of the case is the punishment. Okay, there is no trial which is going to take place. There is no evidence that needs to be led. There is nothing that you need to prove. So you just need to file a case under UAPA. And automatically you have punished them, you have put them under bars, they will not be able to get out. Their name is tarnished in society. Media runs a vilification campaign calling them terrorist, anti-national, anti-development, jihadi, whatever be it, depending on their identity and location. They are called Naxalite, they are called Maoist, and they are put inside. Right? So this is the manner in which they create they criminalize dissent. They ensure that they can create a public opinion to keep the person behind bar by calling them anti-national terrorist. Okay, and they ensure that actually fair trial does not take place, that they do not get paid. So this is a very foolproof plan to create a false case, false narrative and arrest somebody. So this is the way UAPA is being used. Now in UAPA, now Justice Hope in Jalaluddin Khan case in August said that just because it is a draconian, just because it is a very stringent law, it does not mean that the right to bail does not exist. So you have to give bail if there are no circumstances to keep them behind bars. If there is no case against them, you can't keep them behind bars. But if you see the general diktat of the Supreme Court, it has been to be either they give bail after a very long time, after many attempts. Okay, as we saw even in Bhima Koregaon case, it was a struggle to get bail, and each time we were running a campaign. I don't represent the accused in the Bhima Koregaon case, but we were running an entire advocacy campaign with support of all other lawyers as well, and we've been supportive of many different parts of it. Where we had a campaign called Mumbai Rises to Save Democracy, which was a campaign of more than 40 organizations, and PUCL being a part of it. And we were ensuring that we were watching the trial, we were doing programs, we were keeping we were being alert with the media, seeing what kind of false narratives are being put and then busting those narratives, talking about the work of those who have been arrested, so that they cannot be, their name cannot be tarnished, so that there is no media opinion that is built against them, pushing the courts, writing pieces, writing statements. This is the way in which a supportive environment around the case, and also monitoring the case very, very closely. And of course, many of us lawyers who were not directly involved in the case or were involved with only some of the hearings for some of the accused, were also helping out in the other aspects of the case. So this is the way in which a support structure was created around the case. And of course, it still continues. There are still people behind bars, especially the younger, the Dalit cultural activists like Jyoti Jagtap are still behind bars today. The younger people who have been arrested in the case. Mahesh Rawat has got bail, but still he is not released yet. So there are several, things that are still to be done, but it is extremely difficult and challenging in a case like UAPA to especially for the families of those who have been arrested, for the loved ones. For Banu, I'm sure for everybody else who loves Umar, it is extremely difficult to watch this kind of injustice that happens. And whatever support that we can give as civil society organizations, as people in different parts of the country, I think that needs to be done to keep the case alive, to keep to keep advocating for justice and for their release. I think that is the one very important thing. Another tool which is being used and again has been made even more draconian is the PMLA, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. It has been used in order to falsely accuse people of funding terrorist activities. Now this again has been a really challenging issue. The entire reason why the law has been tweaked is in order to make it more draconian, again to make bail more difficult, again to falsely accuse people and keep them behind bars for indefinite periods of time. And in this case also we have seen this happen. For instance, with journalist Siddiq Kappan when he went to Hathras in order to cover the case, and we're seeing this happen more and more with Muslim activists who are raising their voices. Now, if we see recently, not in a PMLA case, but we have Zubair, on whom Section 192, which is the new sedition law, the new criminal law, has been applied. And we also see Nadeem Khan from APCR, who was fighting the bulldozer demolitions in the Supreme Court, and they even through their case got the Supreme Court to formulate guidelines for following due process in any kind of demolition. He also has now been targeted with a false case, and most of these cases we see are in order to curb free speech. So again, Zubair, for instance, was targeted because he exposed the hate speech being made by a vitriolic political leader, and instead of instead of allowing him to speak up against hate, he has been charged under hate speech law. So the misuse of hate speech law in order to curb hate speech is what we are seeing today. For instance, if somebody says that, like we saw during COVID, where someone put up a tweet saying that, oxygen cylinder was not delivered to his grandfather, and he was charged under sedition. He was charged. So this is the way in which hate speech law, sedition have been misused in the past, and we are seeing it even happen today. Instead, those who are actually doing hate speech, FIRs are not being filed against them. So we have filed a petition in the Supreme Court, an intervention in the, in Ashwini Kumar Upadhyay's case on hate speech, in order to, get directions to the police to file FIRs, because FIRs were not being filed in Maharashtra. The maximum number of hate speeches that took place in 2023 were in Maharashtra, and at that point of time we were struggling to get FIRs lodged, and we were trying to file FIRs left, right and centre, writing to the DGP, writing to the Commissioner, writing into the Home Department, holding meetings, trying to hold meetings with the various levels of police officers in order to get the FIRs registered, but the FIRs were not being registered. It is pursuant to Supreme Court's orders in that case that directed the police to take suo motu cognizance of hate speech cases and to file FIRs. And this is one of the reasons why the suo motu filing of FIRs direction resulted in the filing of some FIRs, but those people are not being arrested. So we are seeing on the one hand that those who are trying to spread hate, there is no action being taken against them. But those who are speaking up against the hate, like Zubair, Alt News has been doing maximum work against, fake news, against hate, online hate. They are the ones who are being targeted, and they are being ones who are being, implicated in false sedition cases. So similarly, we've seen, sedition being applied against journalists for the longest time. In fact, PUC had filed a writ petition challenging the constitutionality of sedition, amongst many others who had also filed similar writ petitions, which were heard in the Supreme Court. This is gone up, it's gone off. Yeah.
Disconnected.
Yeah. So many others who had in the Supreme Court, many others who had filed a petition in the Supreme Court, and in that case, a stay order was passed from prosecuting any new Section 124A cases. And after that stay, one thought that okay, for now at least sedition will not be misused against journalists, because if you see until then, a lot of false sedition cases were being filed against journalists. But what has now happened is that with the new criminal law coming in, the BNS which has come in from 1st July 2024, Section 192 has been introduced. And Section 192 is a replica of the sedition law, except that it is even worse than that. And under that, instead of 3 years, the punishment is 7 years. So today, anybody can be So today, anybody can be prosecuted under Section 192 and for exercising their free speech. So the tools which the government has are increasing. In Maharashtra, for instance, they are bringing in the Public Safety Act. They have already proposed a bill earlier, which they did not push in the earlier session, but now they have come into power with a good majority. So in the next assembly, they might even pass this bill. It is the Maharashtra Public Safety Act. It is pretty much like the Chhattisgarh Public Safety Act, which is being used against Adivasis in Chhattisgarh, who have been fighting against forest deforestation and against the mining activities that are taking place in Chhattisgarh. So they have been fighting for their rights, and when they fight for their rights, UAPA cases are filed against them. Chhattisgarh PSA cases are filed against them, and they are arrested. In this manner, hundreds of Adivasi activists are today in prison. We can see the activists who we know, the city activists, those who are vocal, we can see them, what they are going through. But there are hundreds and thousands of activists who are Adivasi activists, who are Adivasi defenders, who are fighting for their land rights, who are arrested today because they are fighting the big corporates, who are destroying their forests, who are exploiting their natural resources. This is also happening in Jharkhand. Hundreds of activists were being arrested and put in jail under UAPA. Father Stan Swami, who was falsely accused in the Bhima Koregaon conspiracy case, filed a PIL in Jharkhand High Court on the false implication of these Adivasis in UAPA cases. And he basically showed that there were en masse UAPA was being misused against Adivasi activists. He was falsely implicated in the Bhima Koregaon case just before the hearing of the case in order to stop the hearing of that case. So even those who are raising their voices against false application of UAPA have been prosecuted in this manner, and Father Stan Swami in fact died because he was denied medical treatment, and he died in July 2021 during COVID. He was not given medical attention. He was suffering from Parkinson's. He was over 80 years old, and he was not granted medical bail in time. So those activists who were fighting against the false application of UAPA were themselves charged with UAPA, and they have found their death in prison just because they were denied their right to bail in time. We saw this happen with Professor Sai Baba. Professor Sai Baba spent, should I stop for some time? It's very disturbing.
চাটা তাড়াতাড়ি দিয়ে নাহলে
Or you can just sit down. If you want to take a chair and sit down. Professor Sai Baba, who spent so many years in prison under the UAPA case, he was finally acquitted. He was acquitted of all charges, which means that he had not committed any crime. But in spite of being 99% disabled, he was not granted medical bail. Finally, it is only post his acquittal that he was released. And it was too late. The surgery that they had applied for in 2019, we had campaigned for that surgery, the gallbladder surgery. He could do that surgery only in 2024. And as a result of it, he died on the surgical bed. And this is the failure, this is what prolonged incarceration has done to those activists who fought for the rights of others who were being falsely implicated by the state because they were fighting for their Jal Jangal Zameen Haq, which is their right as Adivasi defenders, as indigenous defenders. Most of these activists who were arrested in the Bhima Koregaon case, whether it is Sudha Bharadwaj, who was also from PUCL, Father Stan Swami was also from PUCL. You also had Mahesh Raut, a young, ex-PISS student who was a researcher. He was working with the Adivasi community in Gadchiroli and raising so many of these issues. He also has been falsely implicated in the Bhima Koregaon conspiracy case. And similarly, so many others who were there in the case. Professor Varavara Rao, who also got bail, medical bail, only after he contracted COVID, and it is only after we petitioned so much to the NHRC, and finally the NHRC said shift him to a private hospital. And subsequently, in light of his age, he finally got medical bail. Otherwise, until then, the courts were not even granting medical bail. I mean, Professor Sai Baba is a perfect example of how medical bail to a 99% disabled person was denied for so many years, in spite of the fact that his condition was critical. And this is in spite of the fact that look at the prison conditions. What is the condition of our prisons today? At the start of this session, we are talking about what is the amount of overcrowding in the prisons, right? But there are no health facilities. There is absolutely no provision provided. We saw during COVID, at that point of time, if it was not for the multitude of PILs that we had filed in order to, ensure that care is given to different sections, the prison was the last that they were looking at. They did not care what happened to the prisoners, whether they lived or they died. There was no testing taking place, vaccines were not being given in prison. It is only subsequent to PILs being filed and orders being obtained from the court that these, vaccine testing, all of that started. Even then, they were not reporting to the court or to the family of the accused if the accused contracted COVID, because they did not want to tell anybody that there is COVID in the prison, or they did not want to, give them a chance to get medical bail. And in these cases like those who were arrested under UAPA and some of the other special acts did not have the provision for bail during COVID. For others, at least in order to reduce the crowds in prison, they could apply for bail during COVID. But that was not a ground available to those who were accused under UAPA. So they were completely dependent on the prison authorities to provide information that the person has COVID or does not have COVID. Father Stan Swami was not taken for testing of COVID. In fact, the prison authorities and the police denied that he had COVID for the longest time. And that led to delay in him getting medical treatment. And even though he was shifted to the hospital, with his age, with his comorbidities, with him having Parkinson's, it was too late by the time he actually got medical care. So, the condition of the prisons itself is so bad. And at the same time, bail is not being given. Even where there is no evidence against the accused, Just because they are accused under these draconian laws, bail is not given. And in some of the places, there are multitude of such acts which are used. For instance, in Maharashtra, we have the Makoka. Makoka is an organized crime related anti-terror act. We have in Chhattisgarh, like I said, the Chhattisgarh PSA. In the northeast, you have AFSPA. So, in addition to UAPA, you also have all of these other laws. You have some, National Security Act. Okay, in Jammu and Kashmir also, there is preventive detention takes place under the Public Safety Act. So there are multitude of laws that are used and that are weaponized, and most of the time, who are they weaponized against? They are weaponized against, the first people that they are weaponized against is the community. It is the Adivasi, minority, Dalit communities that are rising, that are raising their voice against the development projects, against the corporates, against state repression. They are the ones who are attacked first, and we have hundreds of cases which are filed against them. Of course, the cases which we draw focus on are these activist cases because they have done, they have their visibility so that we can even talk about larger issues. But there is a systemic application that is taking place of these laws, especially in these states, especially in these tribal belts. We see there is a huge misapplication of this law which is taking place. We say for UAPA, UAPA is not misused. Its use is only to incarcerate dissenters in order to silence dissent. And UAPA has been used in this fashion in all of these states. The second line, of course, is the journalists, RTI activists. It has been used extensively also against these draconian laws have been used against journalists, RTI activists because they investigate and they reveal the truth. Most of the RTI activists work on corruption. They try to expose corruption. Whether it is in mining, whether it is in real estate, or whether it is in land fraud, they are filing RTI applications in order to expose corruption. And most of the times, this would lead to gathering evidence against projects, against the government, against corporates, against the crony capital nexus, and exposing it. So again, these whistleblowers are the ones who are, punished for exposing the truth, for doing their investigative work. And then, of course, there are the human rights defenders, the activists who are working as civil society members and who are taking up the cause of, human rights in different areas, and especially those working with the marginalized sections and who are working for protection of natural resources, who are raising their voice against hate and communalism. So this is the manner in which these laws are being used, and I think one of the biggest challenges today is how do we try to break the false narrative that is being pushed by the state in order to create this narrative of nationalism and anti-national people, create this kind of a narrative of terrorists and nationalists, these are the kind of narratives that we are seeing which are peddling around, and they are linked to identity most of the time. Like for instance, calling a Muslim activist a terrorist or a jihadist by even the mainstream media has become so common that it is happening all the time. Because of this, we see that kind of online hate also on social media. It has got legitimacy. Because people got away with doing it the first and the second time round today, we see that if a Muslim activist raises their voice against any social issue, if they even call out the kind of hate that they are facing, then automatically there is this, trolling that they have to be subjected to. They face immense online hate and harassment. So, we are living in a time where speaking up against the government or raising your voice for human rights itself has become a very dangerous act. And in this time, I think joining in, making sure that in none of these cases do we allow legitimization to happen. Every person who has been arrested falsely by this government, we have to ensure that all of them are released and that we. Sorry, someone's talking. ensure that all of them are released and that we can make a very strong campaign for their release. And we have seen that this kind of a campaign can have huge impact. The more we raise our voices in support, the chances of people getting out are going to increase. So this is, just a few things that I wanted to share. But of course, I think there are other speakers as well. So I'll stop here, but if there are any questions, we can discuss.
আমি একটু জেনে নিতে চাইছি যে মানে উনি বললেন যে আরো কিছু কথা ওনার বলার ছিল, অন্য স্পিকাররা আছেন বলে উনি শেষ করতে চাইছেন। আমরা একটু ওনাকে একটু 10 মিনিটের বলতে চাইলে খুবই আমরা অনেকটা শুধুমাত্র সীমা করে গাও নিয়ে উনি বলেননি, উনি এটা সামগ্রিকভাবে গত 1 দশকের ঘটনাবলী এবং 10 মিনিট
I think one of the things that we need to be very concerned about also is the new criminal laws. The new criminal laws that have come have included the same provisions which are there in the UAPA. Identical provisions, the identical offences have now been brought into the regular criminal law, which earlier used to be IPC, Indian Penal Code, has now become BNS. Okay, the BNS has the same provisions of UAPA, which is anti-terror law. They have introduced as section 11B under Terrorist Act. Now in UAPA, in order to start a case or file a case under UAPA, okay, and in order to even label an organization or a person as a terrorist, there is a process. And in that process, you need to take the sanction and you need to go before the board to get the person or the organization declared as a terrorist organization. That process is not there under the regular criminal law, under the BNS. But under BNS, the same offences have been brought in, very, very serious offences of terrorism have been brought in under the regular law. There are two questions which arise. One is, how are you going to in regular course now use this law against people? And which people are going to use it against? Second is, when you have a UAPA, then why have you put this? And when you have this, then why are you continuing with the UAPA? So, it's an identical but towards similar provisions have been added. Second thing, like I said, sedition has been brought back under the BNS. Section 192. Now, sedition had been challenged in the Supreme Court many times before, and the constitutionality of sedition had been challenged. In the judgment passed by the Supreme Court in Kedarnath Singh, the Supreme Court had basically narrowed down the scope of sedition. It basically said that yes, sedition is constitutional for whatever reason. It's the 1960s judgment. But it narrowed down the scope of sedition to say that it has to have it has to be towards inciting violence. It has to have a tendency to incite violence. Only then can it be sedition. Just simply criticizing the government or simply even saying that you do not want the government, you want to overthrow the government is not enough. There has to be a violent act that you are planning to do it. So sedition, you cannot apply it just like that. Now what has happened is that in the new section 192 that has been brought in, okay, again the scope of sedition has been broadened. So it is also against the Supreme Court judgments. Okay, the second very important thing is that this is a backdoor entry. Why is it a backdoor entry? Like I said, in May 2022, the law of sedition, section 124A of the IPC, was stayed by the Supreme Court in all our petitions. PUC was also petitioner, many others were also petitioning. Many journalists had petitioned. And the law was stayed. So since May 2022, police could not file any new FIR under section 124A. Okay, and the Supreme Court had even during the hearings observed that sedition does not have a place in our constitutional setup. In our democracy, sedition does not have any place. It needs to go. This is the way in which it had even advised the government that before we pass a judgment against you, you remove sedition. Okay, so it had been stayed, these kind of initial observations were given, and then on 1st July 2024, the BNS brought in the sedition in a worst form, in a more loose form, in a form that can be broadly used in spite of the fact that it had been narrowed down. So, even the Supreme Court's diktat, the state does not care about or follow. So, if we see now with Zubair's case is just the beginning. Section 192 has now been applied. Now we will have to fear the fact that it will again be used against all those who are speaking up, whether on social media. Earlier also Section 124A was being used against people putting up Facebook posts, Twitter posts. Somebody criticized the abrogation of Article 370 and sedition was applied against them. Some people celebrated the victory of Pakistan in a cricket match on Facebook, wrote a sentence, it was put against them. Okay, journalists who were doing investigative pieces or who were putting up social media posts, sedition was put against them. So sedition was being applied against those who were exercising their right to free speech, online as well as offline, when they are making these speeches. Even in the Veena Koregaon conspiracy case, they have applied sedition along with UAPN. It was always applied for basically giving any kind of an address or writing any kind of a criticism of the government. Now we will see it being applied again against journalists, against those who are coming out and speaking. So now we need to intensify our campaign and try and get now Section 192 also removed. It is going to be a part of our old repeal sedition campaign, and we have to continue with that demand, and we have to expose the fact that they have gone against the Supreme Court judgment and come up with the law again. Then what is the sanctity of the court? We may go to court 10 times, we go in individual cases. Unfortunately, all these criminal cases are isolated battles. Okay, once a case is filed against you, it is you, your family, the organization that you are from, they are the ones who suffer the most. Okay, and we end up fighting those individual cases, but this is not just an individual issue. It is actually a campaign issue. It is an issue that today it is happening to me, tomorrow it can happen to somebody else. During the anti-CAA protest, cases were filed against me also. It was filed against so many other activists who were, organizing protests. So this is the manner in which they use these kind of criminalization against a spate of people. And I won't be surprised if it is filed against more and more people in time. So this campaign becomes a lot more important. And we are also seeing another trend now is how they are using in communities, putting up false cases, even under other, like for instance, the protest clause. There are lots of cases that are being filed against protesters, and we know about it. We don't take them very seriously because the charges are not very, they are not very stringent. I mean, you don't have very harsh punishment. You have 6 months punishment or 1 year punishment. So you had this section 144 which was being imposed everywhere. And those who were going out for protest, they were being put in criminal cases under section 143, 149, under the police acts in different cities. So all these cases were being filed. But what they are now doing is that if there are several cases which are filed against you for violating, the section 144, there are several protest cases filed against you, then they start what is known as chapter proceedings. And in these chapter proceedings, you are required to sign a bond, okay, that you will not be part of any protest for the next 2 years. And this is the manner in which they take bonds from people. They are also preventing people from going to protest. So many times they know that some issue is going to happen and now people will protest. For instance, when in Kevadia, when Statue of Unity was put up, at that point of time they knew that if the Prime Minister is coming to visit the area, people will come out and stand with black flags. So what they used to do is all the activists who are there in that area, all the Adivasi activists and the Grameen activists, they used to pick them up and arrest them the night before open and keep them in preventive detention for 24 hours. Okay, nobody would know their whereabouts, nobody would know where they were. They would confiscate their phones and they would keep them in preventive detention. So there are lots of other tactics also that are used. So one has to try and push the limit, because at the end of the day, otherwise, the more and more the state or the police power increases and police group increases, we will see the undermining of our civil liberties. And we think that this is happening far away, so we don't get too invested in it. But this is all a part of the same agenda of silencing dissent. So we need to have a stronger campaign. I think civil liberties organizations today are facing a big challenge, because all our Article 19 freedoms are under threat, and it's very important for us to reorganize, also to ensure that we can come up with even stronger campaigns, because it is only if we raise our voice, like I said in Bhima Koregaon case. Starting this campaign, many people, of course, they got dealt with a lot of difficulty, it took a lot of time, all of that is true. But I feel the value of advocacy around a case and the value of a strong media campaign, I think we should not shy away from the media. Strong social media campaign, it helps in busting the narrative, it helps in getting public support, and most importantly, it helps in letting the courts know that we are watching. And I think that helped a lot in the Bhima Koregaon case, in spite of the fact that they had done such a vitriolic media campaign to show the accused as, the activists as, Naxalite, as trying to overthrow the government, all kinds of conspiracy charges that they had put. In spite of that, there was a good amount of, public attention that the case got, because of which the courts were forced to hear those bails, forced to hear those matters, and also look into the evidence in the case and grant bail to several of the accused. So that is also so important to have a very strong advocacy campaign, and all of us need to join all of these advocacy campaigns, whether they are in the Delhi riots conspiracy case, whether it is in Bhima Koregaon conspiracy case, whether it is now with the arrest of Zubair, case against Zubair, we should not be arrested. The case against Zubair as well as against Nadeem, or we've seen against so many of the journalists like Siddiq. There have been Sharjeev's case, so many cases that have been filed. We have to join the campaign and ensure that each one of them is released, and especially the younger activists who play such an inspirational role, and they are the ones today who are going to be leading the cause in the future, and it's very important to create that protective environment in civil society. So yeah, thank you for giving me the extra time, but I think there's so many others here who will have a lot of inputs. Kolkata is again city of protest, so it's a good energized place. Yeah.